We'll get to that in a moment. Brendan and Steve, welcome. Steve, let's start with you. There's no evidence, despite all the market's hopes, that the White House is going to back off. There's no evidence they're going to do so.
Well, it seemed to me that the better attitude of the market came from the idea that maybe Lutnick was being pushed out. That was in one of the journal stories, I think, or being otherwise perhaps downgraded, and the idea of Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, being more in charge of the trade issues, and that they were negotiating. But I still think, Kelly, we're where we were, which is this notion of probably some form of permanent tariffs with the possibility that some of the most extreme ones could be negotiated away, but still unclear. We're still in a place where it's not clear both what the ultimate end is, and that was, by the way, something that Congress today, senators today, in the grilling of the trade representative, they were asking, what's the end game, what's the timeline? I think Wall Street's asking the same question still. Yeah,
Brendan, you're looking at the international piece of this, and it's been fascinating to watch the posturing. But again, we've had a handful of nations basically trying to be cooperative, and the White House is still being pretty vague about this negotiation. Just to use the word negotiation doesn't mean they're going to say, sure, the U.S. tariffs are coming down. They could be saying, we're sticking to our guns until you pledge X hundred billions of investment into our country or something like that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think we're starting to see some headlines as it relates to Japan and maybe South Korea, also maybe Indonesia, that maybe are a little bit more willing to come to the table and negotiate and try to bring some of those tariff rates down. What's your earlier question and your earlier point? I definitely think that there are some tariffs here that are going to be permanent in nature. And I think the more contentious, more hostile trade policy is certainly going to be a cornerstone of the Trump administration for at least the next 4 years or so.
Right. What do you think the real fallout is, though? I mean, if you had to say the most noteworthy response you've seen from the international economies affected, from Vietnam to you name it, to Taiwan, I mean, all the rest of them to Europe, what do you think it is so far?
I think it's really the response from China. I think the initial response to Trump administration tariffs on China was that China was going to take a more gradual approach and they weren't going to be overly retaliatory. But that narrative has really flipped in the last, call it, a couple of days or so. They responded with a 34% tariff. Then you see headlines overnight that they're not going to back down from a tariff fight. And I certainly think that they're willing to dig in for the long haul. So I certainly think the most kind of interesting response has been from the China side, and then maybe some of the other closely knit China economies in Southeast Asia as well.